So our three panellists here are representing the Green Party, the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Democratic Party. Didier Coeurnelle, who's on your left, was born and raised in Brussels. He studied law and is currently working as a civil servant in a federal social security institution. He defines himself as a social activist, promoting equality and solidarity to all levels. And he's also co-creator of HEALS, the Healthy Life Extension Society. Didier is a member of the Green Party, active at the municipal, federal and European level. Guy Montrose, Centre, runs a successful healthcare business, lectures at Bournemouth University and is an avid technologist. Guy's a member of the Conservative Party and a borough council for the borough of Poole in Dorset, where he served as the chair of health scrutiny. Darren Reynolds, on your right, began his career as, in his own words, a geek developing computer games in a darkened room. By the age of 26, he was a technology consultant in the Prime Minister's office. And since then, he's held senior technical positions for a number of banks, insurance, and pharmaceutical companies. Darren's a member of the Liberal Democratic Party, which he represents as a local authority councillor and hospital governor in Burnley, East Lancashire. So, as I say, we're going to run this as a Q&A. I'm going to start pitching a question for Didier initially, which is, what do you consider to be the most appropriate balance between public and private funding for this type of work? And how would you and your party maximise the chances of that balance actually being struck?
For the Greens, it's clearly that it's more important to have a public health subsidized research. There is no hesitation, and I would say that in the countries where you have a strong social security and where you have a strong public health research funding, that the life expectancy is better. So, for example, if you compare the Scandinavian countries and the United States, there is a clear difference.
My view, or probably the Conservative view, but we are speaking from our personal point of view as well, is that really, probably private enterprise would be fundamental. Probably no surprise there to many of you. But also there has to be a balance there. So we'd be looking at working with government funds as well, and possibly European level funds as well. I think Didier said that certain countries work better with public funding. I think Switzerland uses a lot of private funding, and that seems to work very well. And also they do a lot of research, and that goes well as well. So my view really is that it's primarily private funded, but also backed up by public money as well.
The question, I think, for any politician is, what do people want? What do you want? What do the ordinary citizens of the world want? And I think that question is best answered by thinking about who you want to own this technology after it's developed. I mean, you guys are all beavering away, contributing to the sum total of human knowledge, producing new approaches to dealing with the world's problems. Who do you want to own that technology? When the decisions are being made about who is it that gets treatment and who is it that doesn't get treatment, who would you rather have making that decision? Do you think that a private company, privately funded, making a profit for its shareholders, should be the arbiter of who is allowed to live and die? Or do you think that a publicly run government, elected by the people, is the right organisation to be making that kind of decision? Now, as somebody who's broadly on the left of British politics, in the Liberal Democrats, it's my view that we ought to have that sort of technology owned by the government, owned by the people, so that when it comes time for getting treatment, whether that's using our National Health Service or through any other method, the decisions about who is entitled to treatment and who isn't are made on a fair basis. Everybody is a human being treated the same. We're all equal in society. And making decisions about life and death based on who can afford treatment and who can't who can afford to fund the profits of the private companies and who can't, is simply the wrong approach as far as I'm concerned. So the balance is, we should be looking for public funding.
Okay, I'm going to open up to questions from the floor. I recognise some people I don't, and it's too much of a distance for name badges, I'm afraid, so there'll be a combination of pointing and description, I suspect. John's very kindly offered to carry the microphone around, so. I should say it might be helpful that before your question you could just introduce yourself briefly.
My name is Patrick Burgermeister from Switzerland. I'd like to make a comment to Darren's statement. We're talking here about therapies, about treatments, and in the past it has hardly ever worked out that governments bring new treatments to the market. It was always the private industry was willing to take the risk and willing to invest the funds. So I'm not sure if this tendency towards public funding could work out.
I'm not sure it's entirely fair to say that all of the knowledge development in the world is down to the hands of private companies. The fundamental research, the basic research, private companies simply won't fund because they don't see a profit in it. And in fact, if you look at treatments for, say, for example, malaria, you have the potential to pretty much cure malaria across the world, but because the people who suffer with the disease can't afford it, it doesn't happen. There isn't the funding there to provide those treatments to people in the parts of the world that suffer with malaria. So I think it's basically false to say that the private sector is great, solves every problem, superb, it's always worked, because it doesn't. Quite often you need state intervention, you need government intervention. Now I'm not somebody who thinks that the government has to run everything, you know. There is, that's one thing where I would agree with Guy of the Conservatives, there has to be a balance. But broadly speaking, the centre of balance should be, for something of this magnitude, of this scale and this importance, it should be in public ownership.
Guy, do you want to come in on that?
Well, only in as much as, you know, I really see the private sector as the driving force behind things. Let's make no mistake, you know, I believe, and the Conservative Party believes in a public healthcare system, i.e. the NHS over here, and we're firmly behind that. But I think the driving forces behind research and moving things forward actually come from the private sector, and that's where the energy and the funds come from. They come from, you know, the hedge fund managers, etc., pumping money into those companies and pushing forward with technology. So that's my view. So one doesn't really preclude the other. I see it very much as working in partnership, hand in hand.
I don't have a lot to add to what Guy said, just that I think also that the big orientations and the big priorities, somebody has to choose, and I think it's better in democratic countries where the majority of the people choose. And I think one of the big priority must be a struggle to postpone aging.
Okay. William?
William Baines, mostly Conservative, probably. And from that perspective, I'll say that Darren's reply was the most outrageous level of bollocks I've ever heard. You're an American.
Bit harsh, bit harsh.
The question wasn't should multinationals run the world. The question was, the observation was that the large majority of therapeutics are developed and launched and manufactured by companies, and not by governments and not by universities, and that is simply a fact. You can't say, well, the government should do it all, because they don't. They're crap at it. They're crap at most things. So we have to accept the fact that private enterprise and private business does take ideas and knowledge that may well be owned by somebody else and make things from it, make things happen. And the question, how do we balance, as Didier just said, the overarching direction we want this knowledge to go in, against that observed fact. And the thing, so, okay, that's my comment. My question for the panel is that there's an observed shortfall in funding for that sort of commercial development, and particularly in the US, charitable foundations are starting to step into that. Instead of funding university researchers, they want